In August 1968, the USSR and Warsaw Pact sent 600,000 troops into Czechoslovakia to put down an uprising. This uprising was known as the Prague Spring. The Prague Spring was really a series of political reforms and freedoms given to the Czech people. A series of reforms and more freedoms and more openness given to the Czech people in 1968. It was different to the Hungarian Revolution. In that it was not a people's movement, there was no violence, it wasn't a big uprising that was then led by a politician. In Hungary, it was a big uprising that found leadership in Nagy. In this case, the reforms, the need for more freedom, for economic change, for political freedoms, for freedom of speech, for the right to criticise communism. This was led by the government. It wasn't led by the people. It was led by Alexander Dubček. Hence, signs like this. The desire for change, the move towards change was government-led, but any protests had not been by the people, they'd been really by students and writers who were frustrated at the economic situation and very simply their lack of freedom. So in early 1968 you had writers and students protesting about their need for more freedom, peaceful protests. The government of Antonin Novotny collapsed, and a critic of his, a man who had been involved in compiling a list of criticisms of Novotny and his government, Alexander Dubček, assumed control of the government and began to instigate an action plan which was about economic and political reforms, releasing and rehabilitating political prisoners, autonomy or some sort of independence for Slovakia. Dubček was a Slovak, and this action plan did not, unlike Hungary, did not involve leaving the Warsaw Pact. This is another difference. So, Novotny out and Dubček in. See, what Dubček was calling for, what Alexander Dubček was calling for, was communism with a human face. He wanted to keep communism, but make it less authoritarian, less like a machine, I guess, and stick to the principles of communism, but a version of communism that was less totalitarian and more people-friendly. So there were student and writers' protests. The Czech government of Novotny collapsed. In came Dubček, introduced reforms and an action plan, and told Brezhnev, we do not want to leave the Warsaw Pact. He understands from the Hungarian example that this is a dangerous thing to do. The Czechs also have a different background to the Hungarians. The Hungarians were involved in invading the Soviet Union, whereas the Czechs were more anti-Western because of the Sudeten land, the Sudeten crisis, the Munich Agreement, there was a different background. So the Czechs were not going to leave the Warsaw Pact. However, the Brezhnev Doctrine said that the Warsaw Pact countries have a duty to intervene inside the Warsaw Pact countries to protect communism. So the Brezhnev Doctrine was confirmed when, despite reassurances that they would not leave the Warsaw Pact, $600,000 Soviet and Warsaw Pact troops were sent in to protect communism. The differences here were that, unlike the Hungarians, the Czech people did not resist. The classic reaction was to, quote, put flowers in the Russians' hair. They knew it was better not to resist because they couldn't. It would have been pointless to resist apart from a point of national pride. So they managed to avoid the casualties of 1956, but they couldn't avoid an invasion. Czechoslovakia stayed within the Soviet sphere of influence, as it was going to anyway, but these reforms, these liberal ideas, they were not going to be tolerated. Simple as that. The communist countries, the Warsaw Pact countries, it was shown in 1956 and 1968, they would not be allowed to go their own way. Membership of Western communist parties, such as the British Communist Party, fell dramatically, or they split. Such was the horror of some people at watching the USSR behave like an authoritarian